Hello to one, hello to all. So, I started my mathematics course at Leicester Polytechnic in the autumn of 1989. Having to scramble for accommodation as I didn't get the email that anyone joining from less than 100 miles radius of Leicester would not get a hall of residence place. Not getting a place in the halls of residence meant I was meeting and making friends with all sorts of people near where I was renting. Looking back, I would say I got in with the wrong crowd, as I went a bit OTT with student life in my first year. Most nights of the week, I was out clubbing or attending a house party until the wee hours of the morning. I could hardly remember much about the house I rented, and I was falling asleep a lot in lectures. Luckily, the curriculum was not too hard and the assignments were short. Money-wise, it was a bit tough. Each new term's student grant went to pay off last term's overdraft as soon as it hit my bank account. And then the overdraft cycle starts all over again. I remember I had to eat from 99p hot dog cans a lot. The first year went really quickly, and most of the friends I made during the year were never to be seen again. Let me explain. Not sure about now, but back then, when I mentioned I was going to Leicester Uni, people would joke, "You need a passport to get there, right?" If you have never heard that before, I will not propagate the slander any further. So most of the students there have strict family traditions, and they tend to let their hair down as much as they can once they are away. The other type of friends I made were overseas students who naturally return to their country once they graduate. Knowing these two groups of people presents you with a high possibility of having no friends once reality knocks at the door. Year 2 for me got a bit more serious as the course got a bit harder, and assignments required more time to complete. Near the end of that year, I had my first shocking incident regarding life in a foreign land. My degree was a sandwich course, which meant the third year needed to be spent in the industry. My first interview was at a major British confectionery company in the city of York. I won't name the company as I know it was a case of a few bad apples and not the whole company that was racist. The day started with a role-playing session where the candidates were watched and assessed by how they participated in discussions regarding various topics laid out on the table. I did quite well as I had an opinion on most of the subjects. After lunch, it was a face-to-face interview with at least one member of the staff. From my uni, at least a dozen of us attended, and I was the only non-white person. As I waited for my turn, I noticed all my classmates' sessions would last at least 45 minutes, and they were all pretty happy with their sessions. When it was my turn, I was seated in an empty room, and the interviewer was nowhere to be seen. 5 minutes later, he appeared with a cup of tea and sat down opposite me with the desk between us. He did not acknowledge I was there and proceeded with putting his feet on the desk and leaning back on his chair. He then put one of his hands down the front of his trousers and just sat there quietly. To me, what seemed to be like an eternity, but it was only 5 minutes of actual time. He decided it was time to end the torture by asking, "Do you have any questions?" I just smiled and said no and left the room. If that was not a priceless lesson, I didn't know what was. A life lesson worthy of the gods. And there was no way anyone could have missed the message. My second try for a placement role was much more successful and smooth. I ended up in Croydon, southeast London, working for a large insurance company, which I thought was more suitable for a mathematics student. Year 3 brought a lot of work experience. IBM was a big name in the computing industry. I am sure they are still big now, but it was the only name back then. Automation, the mundane tasks for each department, was a big trend back then. It was my first taste of what was to come for the next few decades in the work environment. Each department we go into, the staff would have a worried face as they know that once we move on, their colleague numbers will be drastically reduced. I only realized the university grading system halfway through my final year. By then, I thought it was too late for me to get a first and understood why a handful of my classmates were always so chatty to all the lecturers. Needless to say, they were the ones who were most likely to achieve a first classification. But I wasn't going to settle for Mr. Average and promised myself to try my best and see what I could get. The last 4 months of my degree, I think, on average, I only had 3 hours of sleep. I also discovered energy drinks and over-the-counter pills that will allow me to have more time for studying. So I graduated with a 2-1 from a brand new institution named the Montfort University. Unfortunately, the UK went into recession with a 15% interest rate the year I finished in 1992. I wanted to do a master's and maybe more, but we were too poor. Looking for a job wasn't so easy either for a graduate from a less than average university. Back then, it was the pre-internet age, so you had to search newspapers and industry publications for jobs. To apply, you need to write individual covering letters and mail them off physically. If you are lucky, even if you don't get a chance of securing an interview, you will still get a rejection letter back. I was sending off at least 3 applications a day, week in, week out. But none were successful. Each rejection letter I got back just made me feel less and less like a person. Over time, it was an understatement to say my self-confidence was blown to smithereens. What was worse was I had no friends or family members to talk to about how I felt and what I was going through. To add salt to injury, some family members said, "Just work in Chinese takeaways and be happy." At the beginning of 1993, my job applications were slowing down as I had to start work to earn. Needless to say, it was a kitchen job in a local Chinese takeaway, and the owner had no reservations about taking advantage of me by offering me an employment contract for £8,000 a year. It felt like I was doomed to the same fate as my older siblings. But for some reason, in the back of my mind, I always believe I can achieve more than this. And for now, I can't just sit at home doing nothing. For the rest of that year, I worked in the kitchen and even switched to the takeaway where my older brothers work in Hull for a bit more money. Eventually, I stopped the job applications as I was too tired from working the job 6 days a week from 10:30 a.m. in the morning until midnight. During my time working and living with my brothers, I learned one major life lesson, which is life offers what you ask of it, and you don't even need to know how it works. All it takes is a seed of thought brewing in your head. So, viewers, be conscious of what is constantly playing around in the back of your mind. I rarely go out with my older brothers after work, but they kept asking me to join them for one night out to see what it was like. One Saturday night, after we all got paid, I was so glad I did join them because life was about to teach me another big lesson. We went to the local casino and 80% of the customers were Asian because it was the only place that was still open. It was the only place where people within a similar industry and background could gather and catch up. It even had tables of mahjong for people who do not like or know the typical casino games. I can tell the energy level changed as soon as my brothers entered the place, as they seemed to feel so at home among their countrymen friends. The shock to me would come later as I walked around the casino with my second brother. We stopped at a roulette table. After spending 5 minutes watching the people around the table betting, my brother made his move. He took out the brown envelope containing his weekly wage, took out a £50 note and exchanged it for some chips and laid it on one number. Less than a minute later, the ball landed on a number and the £50 was gone. Without the slightest reaction from him, he just walked off. I was still shocked and just abruptly followed behind. The reason it was so shocking was because I know how hard and how long a day he has to work just to earn that £50 note. And it vanished in less than a minute of his life. How could anyone value so little of their life? I wanted to ask, but didn't. Needless to say, both my brothers went home that night with close to nothing in their pockets. I knew instantly then that I'm going to want more from my own life, a lot more. From that outing, I knew I had to get away from the takeaway life before it dragged me in too deep. Let's leave the escape plan until the next episode.